Committee Room 21. Signed. 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 Committee Room Committee Room 30. Signed. 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 Committee Room 30. Sound. 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 Committee Room 30.
Okay, colleagues, good morning and welcome to today's meeting for the Committee for the Economy, and we'll start with apologies which I've received from Kate Nichols, Sinead McLaughlin and Gary Middleton. Item 2 is declarations of interest. If any member wishes to raise at this stage.
Just FSB, just to raise business.
We also have that industrial levy from last
industrial
week.
CITB.
Yep.
Sorry.
So what was the other one?
CITB. So Sheeran, the company that will pay that. So yeah.
Also the credit unions.
Yes.
Second.
Oh yeah, I should declare that I'm a member of a credit union.
As am I.
Same.
Oh, was unanimous, right? Okay, yes.
Okay, item 3, members, chairperson's business. Yesterday, members, the committee had agreed that I would meet SSE Clean Energy Investment, but owing to the pressure of plenary business and my requirement to be in the chamber from 11 a.m. until 3:30 p.m. I was unable to do that meeting, so it's been rescheduled for the 10th of September. Is the committee content with that? Okay. Item 3.2, members, freedom of information requests during the summer recess. It is usual to delegate authority to the Chair and Deputy Chair to submit views on the releasing or withholding of information in non-routine or contentious freedom of information requests received by the committee during the summer recess. I don't think it happens very often.
Ever, in my experience.
Okay. But is the committee content to delegate this authority to the Chair and Deputy Chair?
Yeah.
Okay. Item 4 then, members, is draft minutes at page 7 of our pack, which is a comprehensive overview of our deliberations on the 25th of June. Are members content that I sign as a true and accurate reflection? Agreed. Okay. Item 5 then, matters arising. Is there any issue members wish to raise at this stage which isn't covered later in the agenda? Okay, we'll then move straight to our first evidence session from the National Franchise Dealers Association, and I'm pleased to welcome Alastair Peoples, Northern Ireland Advisor, Jeff McCartney, Group Operations Director at Charles Hurst, Dave Sheeran, Group Managing Director of Donnelly Group, and Brian Robinson, who is the Franchise Director at Agnews. Colleagues, you're very welcome, and thank you very much for making the time to come to committee. We're pleased to welcome you. I'm very happy to hand over to you at this stage to make your opening submission.
Okay, well, thank you for having us this morning. It's a pleasure to be here. We do represent the franchise dealers in Northern Ireland. While we've got a small representative group, we do represent all of the major franchise dealers. Some of the biggest motor trade companies in the region employ in the wider sector some 17,500 people in the whole automotive sector in Northern Ireland. This issue has come around due to Brexit and the divergence between Great Britain and the European Union type approval. Since 2021, GB national type approval came into effect, and while there is a dual option, most manufacturers have not chosen to take advantage of this. So the result is that Northern Ireland consumer will have less choice and will have to pay more tax on cars than consumers in Great Britain. Furthermore, the sector will take a big financial hit with subsequent job losses. We held a meeting with the Secretary of State, Hilary Benn, and an agreement on the issue, and while they were sympathetic, no immediate solution was found. Our solution is that the UK government needs to allow GB national type approval vehicles to be registered in Northern Ireland until they can negotiate a permanent solution in Northern Ireland. And on this side, we can't believe that this was either an anticipated or a desirable outcome of the Windsor Framework. So I'm happy to hand over to my colleagues here now, with Dave Sheeran making the lead.
Thanks, Alastair. As Alastair said, the origins of this issue that we're talking about today is Brexit. Effectively, Northern Ireland will remain in the EU internal market in relation to vehicle certification. The other three UK regions will be covered by the GB national type approval. Type approval is the standards to which vehicles are tested in relation to safety and environmental requirements before they can be placed on the market. Pre-Brexit, it was simple. Everything was covered by the European type approval. Any vehicle sold in the UK had a European type approval. At the point of Brexit, the UK government introduced the GB national type approval provisional scheme, which was a read across from the existing EU regulations, and that's meant there was really no change. Vehicles could be registered as they were previously. February 24, the GB began the transition to the full type approval, so the type approval system that will be the permanent system moving forward. That transition ends on December 31st of this year. So from January 26, a vehicle registered in Northern Ireland must be an EU type approved vehicle. A vehicle registered as new in GB must be a GB national type approval. They can't be, they're not interchangeable, so we can't register a Northern Ireland, an EU type approved vehicle cannot be registered in GB, and a GB type approval vehicle cannot be registered in Northern Ireland. The majority of vehicles are still under the grandfathering arrangements from the provisional scheme. So in the next 6 months, the manufacturers are really scrambling to get their ducks in order and make sure that all of the vehicles from January 26 next year have the GB national type approval, which is where we're going to start to feel the pain of this, unintended pain of this this decision way back at Brexit. As a market, the UK market, manufacturers would talk about the UK market, it's the 4 regions. It's the same product, it's the same price, and stock can move historically freely between any of the regions, and my colleagues will explain how that works in a second. So we're now going to see some fragmentation in the market, in that a Northern Ireland vehicle is a Northern Ireland vehicle. It can't move anywhere. GB vehicle cannot move anywhere. This is going to challenge consumers. It's going to challenge their behaviour. It's going to impact the industry that we represent and also the wider economy. The irony of this, or the contradiction, is once a vehicle is registered as new, it's a used vehicle. Once it's a used vehicle, it can move anywhere. It's not limited to life in the EU or life in GB. It can move anywhere freely. So there is the reason behind, I guess, the original logic was it protects the internal European market, but in fact, for new vehicles, there's not much of a market in the EU for exports. Jeff will have some figures on that later on. This is all about the new market, and it's going to be quite impactful for our industry. So what options do manufacturers have? How possibly can they deal with this? They have 2 options. Effectively, number one, they can certify a vehicle at the point of production as an EU vehicle or a GB vehicle. The second option they have is they can produce a vehicle. If it's produced to the highest or the higher, which is the European standards, it can be given a dual approval. At that point of registration, then the vehicle is declared as an EU vehicle or a GB vehicle. It's the least disruptive of the options, but 50% approximately of the manufacturers have decided to go single type approval and limit the vehicles that they produce for Northern Ireland and limit the vehicles they produce for GB. The reason for that, and this is where the impact on the industry is really going to start to bite, is that all of the manufacturers, whether they're single type approving vehicles now for next year or they with dual approval, they all expect that the GB regulations will diverge from the EU regulations. They will be less onerous. And that's when you're going to start to see further fragmentation in the marketplace. So the sort of divergence points will be the GB regulation will not mandate some of the EU requirements. They may elect to follow the EU rules, but at a different timeline, so it could be 2-3 years later. So we create this imbalance in the market. Or simply they will just apply their own testing protocols to some of the standards. The reason they will do this, that there will be a divergence and they don't just all follow we don't all just follow the sort of broader EU regulation, is that generally speaking increased regulation is increased cost, prices of the vehicles go up, and often there's very little visible consumer benefits to the regulations that the cars are produced to. The UK market is 20% of the EU registrations. So if a manufacturer sees the opportunity to get a cost or a competitive advantage in the marketplace, they're going to take that, and pretty much all of the manufacturers will follow. So whether you're single approved today or you're going for the dual approval, all of the manufacturers that we represent are saying that at some point there's going to be divergence and they will play in that space. They just don't know how yet. What that means essentially is the Northern Ireland market will be left with a subset of what is the UK offering, because not everything that's offered in the UK, in GB will be able to be sold in the EU. So we're going to have not the same product, the same price list, the same stock. We're going to have a restricted price list, a restricted offering. We're going to have a different price list and potentially different taxation. As I said earlier, it's in the next 6 months when all of this is going to start to bite, because everything's been grandfathered until now. There's a number of examples in your pack, in the briefing pack. The one I think is going to hit us first, and it's a very good example of how a consumer and the industry is going to be impacted, is from January 26 next year, something called the utility factor, which is a test essentially to determine the CO2 of a vehicle in Europe has changed. What that means is that the quoted CO2 of plug-in hybrid vehicles will increase. There is a sort of a 50 grams threshold beyond which vehicles get less preferential benefit in kind and they pay a higher road tax. So that's going to impact in Northern Ireland in January 26. It will actually start to impact in Q4 of this year. GB are running with the current testing utility factors, and that will keep the CO2s lower than the EU. So the same vehicle with two different birth certificates will have a higher one will have a higher CO2, which will increase the CO2, the road tax on that vehicle and the benefit in kind for somebody who's using it as a company car. So somebody buying their vehicle in Belfast pays higher tax than somebody buying their vehicle in Birmingham, and that's not fair. So we are gradually losing our unfettered access and our participation in the UK internal market to protect the EU internal market. The Republic of Ireland is our nearest neighbour in terms of car market. It's 122,000 vehicles, new vehicles a year. 58 vehicles have been imported from Northern Ireland in the last calendar year. So it's an insignificant amount of vehicles that they're trying to keep freely flowing within the EU internal market, and they're now compromising the integrity of the UK internal market for our industry. We are a small part of the UK market. We represent between 2 and 3% of the registrations in the UK. So we are collateral damage somewhat in this. So that's where we are. We can see this problem coming. It will impact us. It will impact the consumer. It will impact on taxation, etc. So my colleague Jeff, you want to talk about the broader consumer impact?
Yeah, really just talking about some of the impacts that we've already seen with consumers and what's to come with these changes. Just to firm up on what Dave has said, just about the size of the Northern Ireland market, it's usually around 45,000 vehicles, passenger cars I'm talking about, excluding light commercial vehicles. In the UK, that's closer to 2 million, and in the south, as Dave has said, that's 122,000. The whole reason to dual approve, according to the guidelines, is that there's to be unfettered access both ways. At the moment, Dave's correct. I think there's just 18 vehicles actually have gone down from Northern Ireland into the south of Ireland. The brands, some of the luxury brands that I represent, make up all of those up actually. So there is no car tourism from the south into the north to buy a new vehicle at this moment in time, and understandably so. I mean, the southern market's very, very competitive. They've got really good customer offers. There's really no need for anyone to come to the north to buy a new vehicle. Used vehicles is slightly different, where there's free-flowing vehicles going both ways, but that's certainly not the case with Northern Ireland. So some of the impacts would be, as Dave's already alluded to, is our availability to stock. As you'll understand, car manufacturers build more cars than they normally sell, and they end up with a stockpile of vehicles that they will have at their import centres all around the UK. And all of the UK dealers can draw from that stock. And indeed, as that stock ages, a lot of the manufacturers put special offers, customer savings, cashbacks, deposit contributions if you're taking finance. Our customers won't be able to draw from that stock, so we won't be able to give our customers those offers. The whole irony of this situation is that a retail customer can actually go to the UK and buy that car as a new car and bring it to Northern Ireland, but we can't actually source that car for them, which basically cuts us out of the transaction and puts our businesses and indeed jobs here in Northern Ireland at risk. From a benefit in kind point of view, as Dave's alluded to, that the benefit in kind for plug-in vehicles initially will be different for a company car user here in Northern Ireland versus someone who buys in the UK. Some of the leasing companies who already supply those cars to our customers in the UK and source those vehicles from us are already telling us that they're going to buy those vehicles directly from UK dealers, register them in the UK, and then supply them to local business users here in the north, which would really cut us out of the transaction again. So really putting our businesses at risk and putting our customers at a disadvantage. Dave talked also about specification changes. We've already had that. So GSR2 which is general safety regulations in the EU, changed from the UK. Where you GSR2, you'll probably recognise some of these features in your own cars. It had advanced driver assistance systems, which is basically lane assist, autonomous emergency braking and emergency lane assist. Our vehicles in the EU, and including Northern Ireland, had to have that. They didn't have to have that in the UK. So for some of the brands that we represent, our customers had to order those as optional extras, or we couldn't register the car. The difference to that, the Northern Ireland consumer, was £4,000 just on those options alone in a car. So we can see this divergence and the price differences that are coming in, and indeed the confusing picture that it causes when someone goes on to spec a car online, which I think most people do before they actually contact us. They may come to us and not actually get the specification that they've looked at online because they'll be looking at a UK specification. So all sorts of potential confusing issues for a customer. And really, as far as we can see, this is going to be detrimental to customers in Northern Ireland. I mentioned the market of 45,000 vehicles in Northern Ireland. 42% of that market is supplied to Motability customers in Northern Ireland through the Motability route. That's only 16% in the UK. So customers who get a PIP allowance obviously buy a lot of their vehicles through the Motability scheme. There's no doubt that those customers are going to be challenged in terms of upfront deposits, because the Motability scheme won't be able to support that here in Northern Ireland as it does in the UK, because there'll be differences in pricing and all sorts. So for those vulnerable people who need their car and buy it through that channel, it's going to be a challenge for them. So those are some of the consumer issues that we already see materialising here in Northern Ireland. Brian's going to cover some of the business challenges.
Thanks, Jeff, and good morning, everybody. Just in terms of the industry, how the industry ecosystem works currently is that manufacturer product offering is referred to as a UK product offer. All vehicles are available in all UK regions, same ORP, and purchased via the franchise dealer network. The same benefit in kind for taxation also applies. Dealers, we order vehicles on a sold and unsold basis from the manufacturer, and the manufacturer also will maintain a pipeline of unsold vehicles to support future demand. All unsold vehicles will move freely between the UK 4 regions, and no limitation where they're registered. Manufacturers will closely monitor sales rates, and they will stimulate demand with consumer offers, for example, 0% finance. And approximately half of all vehicles sold will be from that pipeline stock. Potentially the changes will mean that the manufacturers will modify their systems and their customer-facing platforms. We will see vehicles marketed as not available in Northern Ireland. That will become prevalent. We will no longer, as NI dealers, have access to UK unsold stock and pipeline, as that will be built to the future GB standard and not registerable in Northern Ireland. Consequently, we will be required to order all of our vehicles for customers at point of sale, which will increase massively customer lead times. Any stock which we order speculatively will have to be built to the EU standard and will only be registerable in Northern Ireland. Stock management is a large financial risk to our industry, and without the free movement of stock between the 4 nations, we will carry a much bigger commercial risk, which is great concern. So basically, restricting of choice and disadvantage in terms of price against the other 3 home regions. This will open the market up to effectively GB-based dealers being able to pre-register cars and actively sell these cars into UK as used cars, in which there is no restriction. So the impact of doing nothing essentially is that some manufacturers may leave NI entirely, as the volume does not justify them being here. And doing nothing, consumer choice is restricted, increased price compared to the rest of the UK, higher BIK taxation, differential specification and customer confusion, and reduced stock availability. It's likely that we will see a reduction in the size of the NI car market. 20 or 30% would not be an unrealistic estimate of that, and car tourism will become commonplace. The revenue, the NI dealer revenue is probably in the region of 3 billion, and you could see that reducing by perhaps 0.9 billion in this scenario. And that reduction in turnover leads to a reduction in investment into facilities and into the local economy. Likely is that the sector will reduce in Northern Ireland with job losses. That would extend into after-sales apprenticeship, business closure, lower business rates, reducing second-hand car market. So our solutions in summary, Dave, you're going to cover those off?
I think we've covered all the points that we'd like to get on the table. If you go back to the origin of the regulation, I think what we're now seeing is the unintended consequences. That sort of maybe the naive assumption was, well, all vehicles are the same in Europe. Everyone will go with the dual option, and everything will carry on as normal. That was the simplistic view of the government at the time. What we're now seeing is the reality of that start to manifest. It will be operationally challenging for us. We'll deal with as much of that as we can. But from a consumer point of view and just as a broader industry and economic point of view, the situation is unworkable, is untenable, and really it's unfair that somebody in Northern Ireland should be required to have less choice, pay more for the privilege of supporting their local business, and pay higher taxes for that. And that's what's going to happen. And we can see it coming. We're now in the 6 months of the rush to where the manufacturers are sort of getting themselves ready. Our belief is that the principle of Northern Ireland having unfettered access to the UK internal market should be protected, and the consumers should enjoy those benefits. The only workable solution is that the GB national type approval can apply to registrations in Northern Ireland. That will challenge the EU legislatively, in that the legislation is there to do the exact opposite. There is limited risk to the EU for allowing GB NTA to have some kind of derogation for Northern Ireland. But it is something we understand will take a while to legislate. So I guess what our ask is of the committee is to facilitate the temporary inclusion of GB national type approved vehicles as being able to be registered in Northern Ireland, whilst a longer term solution can be put in place. There is a precedent for this when Brexit happened in 2021. There was some anomalies around VAT, again, some unintended consequences of how the protocol, etc., was drafted. We were allowed as an industry, the VAT margin scheme, to continue to operate as normal, whilst a political solution was found in the background. It took a couple of years, but nevertheless it allowed the industry to breathe and to function as normal. So that's what we're looking for. That's what we would like your support for, is to allow GB national type approval to apply in the short term and become a longer term legislative fix to the problem. And that we'll now take any questions if you need any more further information on the paper or any of our oral evidence here.
Thank you very much for that. I just want to go back to the opening of your evidence session, firstly from you, Alastair, and then you, Dave. So you made the comment that this was a result of Brexit. It's not quite factually true, is it? This was a result of a political decision taken by the UK government to sign up to the Northern Ireland Protocol and then through the Windsor Framework. Hadn't we taken the decision by the UK government or political parties here to champion the interests of the EU internal market over the United Kingdom's internal market, we wouldn't be in this position. Correct.
Chair, I did mention the Windsor Framework.
You did, but I just think it's important that we have context, because we threw out this term because of Brexit, despite Brexit, which was obviously the democratic decision of the people of the United Kingdom. These were political choices that were made by politicians both here in Northern Ireland and by the UK government to prioritise the EU market, and that's the situation that we now face. What do you see as the threat to the sanctity of the EU market, of a new car being sold in Northern Ireland that needs to be protected by these ridiculous regulations?
We did hear there are 18 vehicles which were exported last year. If that were to double, that's 36 vehicles. I mean, we don't see that there's any threat to the European market. As I said, this was neither anticipated nor is it desirable, and I think it's the catastrophic consequences for the folk in Northern Ireland are clear to see. We're not aware of any concerns from the Southern government that this is suddenly going to open floodgates, so it is something that is only a consequence for the consumer and the dealers in Northern Ireland.
It couldn't. I mean, if national GB national type approval applied here, vehicles could no longer be exported to the south. So the 18 that do go down there would be zero. The irony of it is the most healthiest traffic of vehicles, north south and east west are used vehicles. And once this vehicle is registered, it doesn't matter whether it's an EU vehicle or a GB vehicle. That market functions freely, which is, an irony of this, and it's
a piece of paper signed and a car is registered, and then the barriers to trade stop, and the great threat to the EU single market suddenly disappears as soon as a piece of paper is signed.
Just to add to those 18 vehicles are made up of Ferrari product and Bentley product, which are all a manual process, because there isn't such a thing as just totally unfettered. There's a VRT, there's a vehicle registration tax that has to be paid when you import a car into the south, which you have to pay on top of the price. So that's all a manual process anyway, and it is only those specialist vehicles that are going at this moment in time.
Another point I'm going to slightly disagree on you is the unintended consequences. This was willful ignorance. It wasn't as if people who championed these arrangements weren't warned about the implications of them. Businesses right across Northern Ireland had made clear that the UK internal market, particularly when it comes to this issue, was the most important. But politicians, some represented on this committee, prioritised the sanctity of the EU market and the great threat that 18 vehicles could place to a population of tens of millions of people, rather than jobs here in Northern Ireland of the people that they're meant to represent. So if I could just go to the actual people of Northern Ireland who are employed in this sector, the businesses that contribute to our economy on a day and daily basis. So did you say 17,500 people are employed in that here in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, that's right. And we got that from a baseline survey carried out by the Institute of the Motor Industry.
It's worth £3 billion to the Northern Ireland economy. Have you done any analysis of what the economic impact, both in terms of jobs and in terms of contribution to the economy, that if we don't get a solution to this issue, faces?
I suppose it depends on the number of people who do the tourism buying, but I don't know, Jeff.
I think from a business point of view, I did mention that some of the leasing companies that supply vehicles in Northern Ireland will do that through UK dealers.
Yes.
We could have consumers who would come in and say they wanted a red Range Rover and we don't have one, and there's one in the UK, they'll jump on a boat and go on bad. So we're really not sure, but we think it's going to be very, very significant, both in terms of our profitability to jobs and, as Brian alluded to as well, our future investment in the brands that we do represent. And I know some brands who want to come here, some of the newer brands that do electric vehicles, are really thinking twice as to what they do, because it's such a small part of the market.
Yep.
As Dave said, it's 2%. 45,000 vehicles out of 2 million. It's a very small part of the market.
Fleet and mobility are a large part of the overall market, and certainly fleet companies are already asking the question about sourcing vehicles from UK mainland.
Could you just tell me about your engagement to date with the UK government, and any engagement that you've had with Lord Murphy, who's obviously doing the current review of the impacts of the current arrangements?
You met with the Secretary of State?
Yeah, we met with the Secretary of State and in January, along with Lillian Greenwood.
Yeah.
We presented this paper. They understood the issue. They didn't offer anything by way of a solution. They proffered that the best solution would probably be, it would be just better if we all follow the EU regulations.
You're saying the UK government solution was that the customers here in Northern Ireland should have less choice, should pay higher prices, and that the economy should be...
They suggested a converging of EU and GB approval levels at some point down the line. Yep.
His advisors advised him, because he had his advisors that day, that based on how they do it, the UK would always be at least 12 months behind, which was a concern. He also basically said that it wasn't his government that decided to go for Brexit, so he really blamed the previous government, which we understand, there's a political side to this, but
The
as a
Secretary of
business, we
State
just
who you were speaking to voted for the Windsor Framework, which put in these regulations. So, okay.
So the answer really was, well, we understand the issues that are likely to manifest. I think the advisors all confirmed that what's in the paper is correct. The only thing we don't know is the scale, and we would just have to live with it until the government could align EU regulations with GB regulations with EU regulations. Which, as Jeff says, there's always going to be a lag. So there's always going to be a problem here. So depending on how much car tourism becomes a thing, and depending on how much the leasing companies offshore their registrations from Northern Ireland to GB to get to work around the regulations, that will determine the extent of the impact. But we can see what's happening. The manufacturers, it's quite difficult and complex regulation, and it's like peeling back an onion. As you understand one change, it multiplies to some 3 or 4 other changes that you hadn't thought of. So we're sort of heading towards the car crash, and we sort of like to swerve around it, but at the moment we're just being asked to drive into it, and so that's.
I think GB Retail will make this easy for NI consumers. I mean, they will actively market car tourism. They'll be picking people up at airports and doing all the admin for them.
I think it's useful maybe to put in context that we already have challenges. With our parts declarations, we've had to employ extra resource for that. The tariffs that have been imposed on Chinese imports by the EU, we also have to pay those when vehicles come to Northern Ireland, and we can only claim those back once we've sold those to an end user and proved that they're a resident of either Northern Ireland or GB, and that takes at least 40 days. So, from a cash flow point of view, we're already feeling the heat. This is just something that's really going to impact us.
Well, we're not part of the EU for Chinese tariffs, but we are part of the EU for type approval, which, so there's lots of inconsistencies here that just need to be ironed out, and the solution is GB national type approval applies in all 4 regions.
100%.
The nature of the industry is it's high volume, low margin, and moves quickly from profit to loss, and that invariably means job shedding.
Yep. We're kind of in the scenario where we're asking to be created, which is a sort of allow GB national type approval to apply for a period of time until a permanent solution is found. We've been in that situation for the last 4 years, where the provisional approval was given to all of the vehicles, and we've been able to register vehicles. So it's really an extension of the transition period that's already been in existence. We need until a permanent solution is found, because the solution that's hitting us on January the 1st, 26, is untenable.
100%. No, it is useful, and this place was restored in January 2020 on the back of New Decade, New Approach, which all executive parties signed up to, and the British and Irish government, which made clear that there needed to be unfettered access within the UK internal market. The UK Internal Market Act, which Hilary Benn may or may not like, but he's bound to it because it's UK law, is that special regard needs to be given to the Northern Ireland's place within the UK internal market. So his view may be you just need to live with it, but certainly not what we're going to do, and we're going to, as a political party, continue to champion your cause, because 17,000 people employed, £3 billion to our economy is vital, and that can't be sacrificed just to protect
the other committee we've engaged with is the Lords Scrutiny Committee for Northern Ireland, who I think are also taking the issue seriously. So we're happy to engage with whichever the appropriate channels are to move the issue forward.
I'm going to open up to colleagues. Emma?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to you all for the presentation. I know there's been a wee bit of politicking since our session began this morning, and obviously I would agree with your initial assessment that this is all as a result of Brexit, and that's where we're at. I suppose just only comment or question for myself, just a clarification. This is an ask of the British government, obviously in negotiation with the EU, which is beyond the remit of this committee and this assembly. and is an international agreement, and that has to be negotiated. But I think we can, and probably all members will agree, and definitely from our perspective, the importance of this industry to our local economy, and particularly those people who are employed in the industry, is something we want to see protected. So anything that we can do to encourage the British government to support the industry and to make, I mean, the ask that you've laid out both verbally today and then in the presentation doesn't seem to be a massive barrier really. So just to lend our support to that, and anything that we can do to help be a champion for your industry.
Thank you.
That's me.
Thank you, Emma. David?
Thank you. Just to come in on that as well, I absolutely fundamentally agree with you that Brexit is the core to this. You know, we were, and it's disappointing this committee today has politicised this. I'm still waiting for the 350 million a week for the health service. We can all sleep in our beds thinking, knowing that's there too. But there's anything we can do to help. I want a couple of questions on this. You said about, I think of the company car tax. You said about the cars coming in under EU regulations would then be at a higher tax rate than for members of the car owner here. Why would that be the case? Why would the UK government use the EU standards for the tax and not, if it used to be anyway, and I haven't had a company car for a while, but it used to be that the car was already you went in and said it was a whatever Ford Focus, and it was already there, and that was already predetermined from the UK. Why would there be another? Why would they?
So there's there's the scales of CO2, of which different rates of BIK and vehicle tax excise duty apply. The utility factor relates to plug-in hybrid vehicles, which are becoming a more prevalent
real world
vehicle. Yeah. So the utility factor is basically an assessment of how much the vehicle is driven on electric and how much the vehicle is driven off electric. The real world experience is that perhaps people are using it less on electric, more on conventional fuel, and therefore the CO2 emission is higher. So the EU have updated their test.
Yeah, no, I get that.
GB have said, well, we're keeping it the same.
Yeah. No, I understand that. But what the bit I'm trying to get is how the Treasury would use the EU figure rather than their own figure for the car.
The Treasury go off the CO2, which is on the taxation document of the vehicle. So if the vehicle is born an EU vehicle, it has a different CO2 figure in it because it's an EU vehicle. The same vehicle with just the different utility factor applied has a lower CO2. So you pay tax based on the CO2 of the registration document.
The declared CO2.
Yeah, the declared CO2.
Okay, so it's on the CO2 rather than on the actual car itself.
So the value on the CO2 will be a factor.
Yeah. Then I was trying to think through there. If you're bringing a car, if a car is coming through GB figures or EU figures, you're basically a car in the north and south. I was trying to go, what's the difference then? So the manufacturers then are actually having to manufacture specifically for Northern Ireland. Yep. There's a batch of cars manufactured for Northern Ireland. You can't actually bring across. And then the south, if you can't bring it, so I was thinking, what's the difference? Do you know if you have name a brand, Renault in Belfast or a Renault in Dundalk, but then it's kilometres per hour. Is that the only difference? I'm trying to work out how. Yeah, so we're a very small market then. Yep. For manufacturers, so they're actually producing on a production line.
Yeah.
Specifically for.
Yes, when we go on to order a vehicle, we now have to order. We have a drop-down box actually with most of our brands. That is for NI, where previously we would have just drawn from the UK stock or ordered a UK vehicle as such. So yes.
So they're specifically having to manufacture just for here. So you can't use. So why is there a reason why that can't be all island? Is that because?
Well, it is. I mean, you can sell those cars into the south.
Yeah. You can sell them to the south.
Yeah,
but can somebody from here?
You can't sell them back into the UK.
Yeah. Okay. Can somebody from here go down to Dundalk then and purchase?
Yes, they could.
A car and bring it.
Yes, they could.
north. So it's a worse of everywhere for you. Yeah. So you've got the
no man's land. Really, we're almost on an island in our own right.
Yeah. Collateral damage is what you said earlier. Yeah. It's really
we're insignificant in the scheme of the UK market, which is 2 million vehicles a year. We represent 2-3%.
Those particular vehicles that Dave's talking about, plug-in and hybrid vehicles, represent 22% of all cars sold in Northern Ireland, and it's growing. Diesel year to date is back 20%. Pure petrol is back 15%. So EV and plug-in are the biggest parts of the market here in Northern Ireland that are moving up year on year. So,
again, it seems like a nonsense. To be honest, so if there's anything again we can do to support this, is sort of you said this backs the Brexit, and this the difference is going to happen. Anything we can do to help and support. Happy to do. So thank you,
David. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate you coming along today. I understand for some time you felt politically homeless as to trying to find a committee or a political group to take up your cause, because that's why I pushed to get you before the committee. I sit on the Windsor Framework Committee. You got the stock answer of that's not the committee's remit. You've been with the Committee of Infrastructure, not the committee's remit. The House of Lords have been sympathetic, but yet that's all that they can offer you. And I've said it time and time again that there are real life examples that are coming down the road about how the post-Brexit trading conditions applied to Northern Ireland are going to impact upon consumers and business. You just happen to be the very first that have to come before the committee to spell it out. For too long, too many businesses didn't want to touch the issue because they believed it would have winged them into the political realms, but in reality it's about businesses and consumer choice. Now I want to nail the myth about the Brexit question, and it's a simple yes or no. If Northern Ireland had followed the same post-Brexit trading conditions as the rest of the United Kingdom, would this be an issue for us today, yes or no?
Well, it wouldn't be.
No, it wouldn't be.
And that's not. We don't want to be.
No, and I'm not getting you into that. I have to nail the myth. If Northern Ireland had followed the same rules applied to the rest of GB, this would not be an issue today. That is correct. Correct. Okay. Now, hold on.
No one interrupted you when you were speaking.
Now, the other myth, gentlemen, that we constantly hear in this place is dual market access, coupled with the best of both worlds. There's been a bit of progress at the committee today. For the first time ever, Mr. Honeyford has said it seems like the worst of both worlds. Something that we've pointed out continually, time and time again. Because here's what happened. And you talked, Dave, about a naive former UK government, or perhaps in some way unintended consequences. I would argue it wasn't at all. They knew the risks. They used Northern Ireland as a sacrificial lamb to prioritise EU access over that of the GB market, and you're paying the consequences of that, and as are the consumer. Because by their actions, and indeed by some that endorsed it in this place, what we have seen is what? The prioritisation of 18 vehicles over 45,000 vehicles. The prioritisation of somebody getting a customised Ferrari in the Republic of Ireland over 17,500 jobs in Northern Ireland. It's ridiculous in the extreme. So I want to just ask you, for that 18 vehicles, when we look at type approvals, surely there's traceability. There's a high traceability in new vehicles right across the world, I would imagine. So why on earth would the GB scheme not apply from the very get-go? Because surely you know exactly the risk of contaminating the EU market. 18 vehicles. What's the traceability of those vehicles? How could the Europeans be so satisfied that their market is not being compromised? And how could the industry ensure that traceability was there? Does anybody want to take up that point?
Certainly any vehicles that go into the south have to be manually imported and the taxation paid separately, so there is complete traceability.
So complete traceability. So is this not bureaucracy and red tape gone mad? There is no threat to the EU market. How would business, in terms of your representative organisations, feel about sacrificing your access to the EU market, that being the Republic of Ireland, over having access to the UK internal market? Would there be a huge issue?
I think today that's what we would like. There isn't a market for us to chase in the south of Ireland. There is no market. Our market is here in Northern Ireland.
We are a right-hand drive market.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you go into this blind? Did you understand that there was no market for you in the Republic of Ireland, as opposed to the best of both worlds that some were trying to articulate when it comes to your specific industry?
We're passengers here, essentially.
Yeah. And you're not alone. I mean, do you understand how serious this is? I have heard politicians in this building, even right up to now, ask me, what are these businesses and consumers that are having all these issues with the post-Brexit trading conditions? I haven't heard them. Nobody can say now that they haven't heard, because I know others, but they have been fearful of entering into this forum because they don't want to get involved with the politics. I'm not asking you to get involved in the politics. I want you to outline the real world business consequences for some of these decisions. How many vehicles are sitting on your forecourts at the moment unable to be registered?
GB vehicles? Well, really, we've transferred back GB vehicles, but our stock holding would have to increase in terms of ordering vehicles specifically for Northern Ireland. And I think Bran covered that well, whereas we would have normally drawn from the UK stock that would have been based around the docks across the UK. So we have to order, so our stock holding goes up. You don't get stock free, you've got to pay interest on that, so our cost of doing business has risen.
We have lost opportunity because one particular manufacturer that I can relate to incorrectly built some vehicles for NI to GB spec. So those vehicles wrongly built couldn't be sold here. We lost the opportunity. That can't be recovered.
Okay. Yeah. What is the total cost to business if you're forecasting that this happens and the EU type approval is precluding vehicles from coming to Northern Ireland?
The high level estimate is potentially a 20% plus reduction in the market, in the new car market, which would equate to between 10,000 and 15,000 vehicles a year.
Yeah. And the figure you quoted in terms of those associated with PIP, so out of the 45,000, what was the figure?
42% versus the 16% in the UK.
So 42% of that 45,000 vehicles are to protect those on benefit income, those that are in need of
the PIP allowance. Use it for buying a car.
Yeah. Right. Okay. The other point for me is in terms of how this can be manipulated in the future to the advantage of, in this case, the GB supplier over the Northern Ireland franchise dealers. So, new vehicle is registered in GB, then to be sold in Northern Ireland as second hand, correct?
Correct.
So how does that manipulate the market and put our own indigenous business in Northern Ireland at a disadvantage?
The customer will buy the vehicle as, forget about used at this stage, but if someone wants a new vehicle or to buy it from a leasing company, today they buy that through the franchise dealer in Northern Ireland. They would buy that through a UK dealer direct and just bypass us.
So I, as a British citizen living in part of the UK and Northern Ireland, can go to England, Scotland, Wales to buy a new vehicle to the GB type, drive it home and drive freely. Am I right?
Yeah, 100%, and we can't supply that.
But I as a UK citizen living in Northern Ireland can't go to my dealer up the road where local people are employed and purchase the same vehicle. That's correct. And if I was to purchase similar, I would be facing higher costs.
You can, but it will cost you more, either transactionally or in benefit in kind.
Yeah. Bureaucracy gone mad, gentlemen. Yes. I support your call, and be assured that we will continue to advocate for that at every turn. You're here before the committee today. I can assure you, you won't be the last. We're listening to an FSB report after this briefing session, which talks about the costs of businesses in relation to the Windsor Framework. Northern Ireland was sold a pup. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, came over to say it would be the most exciting economic region in the world. That was deception and lies. You talked about three words: deception, disruption and decimation. All of that is happening And it's happened whilst politicians have had their blinkers on to the real world problems that we face. So thank you for your presentation, and be assured we'll continue to take up your cause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Last but not least, Diana.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here this morning. Yes, it is like, you know, like other members in the committee, you have my support. I can understand the problem that you're facing, and this is a precursor really to more of the same coming down the line. So a number of my questions have been answered, but can you see this being applied to new HGVs and new motorcycles as well? Is that the next thing that it'll happen to?
Very likely.
It already applies to the LCVs. Commercial vehicles are affected the same way.
They're affected in the same way, yeah. So that's another market, yeah.
I don't know.
And this is a problem that's only going to get worse as more regulation is added to European whole vehicle type approval. The competitive advantage of having GB type approval will widen.
Yeah. Have you got a voice in Europe? Have you spoken to the European Commission and any of the European bodies on this? Have you lobbied there?
No, not at this stage. No.
And do you think that would be useful to have a voice there?
We'd need some advice as to who we need to talk to.
Yeah, as to who. Yeah, as we said earlier, trying to find the right committee to speak to has been difficult enough within the national framework. Within the EU, it might be even more difficult. But we'll follow that up.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Gentlemen, we appreciate that. The committee will now just have a brief discussion about how we take this forward. My personal view is that we as a committee should be contacting Nick Thomas-Symonds, who's the UK government responsible for EU relations, and that this needs to be raised urgently with European counterparts, and that an agreement needs to be sought. This can't be a year exercise. We're now on a ticking time bomb in January 2026. Business can't plan and jobs are at risk. So from my view, I think that this needs to be a unanimous view from the committee that we take this forward. So we will have that discussion, but thank you so much for your evidence session. Thank you for what you do for the Northern Ireland economy, and thank you for your continued dedication on this issue.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Okay, colleagues, in terms of follow-up then, I think it's clear that no one is content with the current situation. Would the committee be content that we contact Nick Thomas-Symonds and also the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, articulating the impact that this is having here in Northern Ireland and the need to find a solution?
Yeah, sure, I would. I think one, and Emma will probably attest to this as well, when it comes to the Windsor Framework Committees set up, because it's so focused on the process of the active inquiry process and also focused on new and amending law that has yet to come into effect, this has, it sometimes then makes it very difficult to look retrospectively then at the impact that certain decisions have had. There needs to be much more engagement with committees like this to be able to flesh out the troubles that they're facing to represent with government. I believe that we need to robustly put that case to UK government, and failing to do so, then the committee needs to look at other actions that it can take to press the case, because we can't just let issues like this drop. It's one of many. We'll hear it again here shortly. But we need to have a systematic way in which we can certainly represent the needs and interests of local businesses and consumers.
Your colleague want to add anything?
Yes, Emma. I understand Jonathan's frustration. It is the remit of the Windsor Framework to look at upcoming legislation and not something that's already in place. So that's where we're at. And obviously this is for the British government and the EU to thrash out. So our role, I think, is as a conduit to relay that information, and that we're hearing concerns from businesses on the ground. I do think it's important that we also put the context of the fact that had we left the EU in the same context as England, Wales and Scotland, our economy would be in a much worse place than it is, and they have obviously suffered as a result of that, and we have been somewhat protected.
Let him finish.
Different reports have referred to different job losses and an economy that's much weaker as a result of Brexit. So I think it's important just to bear all of that in mind.
I'm keen to get a consensus position just on this. So are we content that we contact UKG through Nick Thomas-Symonds in relation to our concerns on this particular issue and the need to find a resolution between UKG and our European colleagues? Are members content on that?
Yeah.
Is your solution then a derogation?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's information gathering at this stage, and ultimately then the committee should remain open to looking towards whether it's a committee motion or whatever, encouraging that UK-EU engagement to ensure that this issue is dealt with, because we can't let it drop.
Always content? Okay, we're agreed. Thank you very much indeed, colleagues. We're now going to move on to item number 7, which is the Federation of Small Business Evidence Session to give us an overview of their report on the realities of the Windsor Framework survey that they carried out. So I'll invite colleagues forward, many of whom don't need any introduction, but Roger Pollen, Head of Federation of Small Business here in Northern Ireland, Rachel McCorriston, who's the Head of Policy, and Lorna, Muldoon, who is a Policy Advisor at the FSB Northern Ireland branch. Colleagues, very welcome, and I'm going to hand over to you to make an opening statement.
Thank you very much. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today on behalf of the Federation of Small Businesses to present the findings of our report, The Windsor Framework Realities, Barriers to Trade in the UK Internal Market. I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Rachel McCartney, who's our Head of Policy for FSB Northern Ireland, and Lorna Muldoon, who's FSB Northern Ireland's Policy Advisor leading on the Windsor Framework. Before I go further, can I just also declare an interest as an appointee to the Board of Intertrade UK, in case it's relevant.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Our commiserations.
If you're content, I'll set the scene and then my colleagues will address various aspects of the report, including key findings, the lived experience that members have chosen to share with us, and recommendations that flow from the report. So the Windsor Framework is now firmly part of the economic and political landscape of Northern Ireland. It has provided a basis for managing trade arrangements between GB, Northern Ireland and the EU following the UK's withdrawal from the European Union. While the Windsor Framework aimed to stabilise relations and offer clarity after years of uncertainty, our research suggests that for many small businesses, practical uncertainties and barriers remain, and in some cases have worsened. Now, we'd been picking up a lot of anecdotes from colleagues in GB, but there was no evidence available, so we decided, as the only UK-wide organisation representing SMEs, to undertake a survey of members right across the UK, and that survey led to the report that we want to discuss with you today. Our research was undertaken on a UK-wide basis with 778 businesses contributing, many of whom trade or supply into Northern Ireland. This dual perspective of understanding businesses in both GB and Northern Ireland, in other words, both ends of the supply chain, is key and provides one of the first comprehensive post-implementation snapshots of how businesses are experiencing the Windsor Framework in practice. We'll certainly draw on the statistics and data from the report as we go through, but we'll also try to balance this with sentiments and perceptions and the lived experience that members have chosen to share, as well as looking at some of the recommendations that arise as obvious conclusions from the evidence that we've gathered. With such an extensive number of participants in the survey, it would be possible to get bogged down in statistics and percentages. We'll try and avoid that, but the numbers are an important illustration of the nature of the problems. While some firms are adjusting and innovating, others, it would appear, particularly smaller businesses, are being left behind. The headline finding is that 1 in 3 businesses surveyed have already faced significant disruptions, such as supply chain delays, stock shortfalls and lost sales due to the Windsor Framework, with 29% anticipating future disruptions. A significant number also said it had induced uncertainty into business planning. In GB, a large proportion of firms told us that they had only limited understanding of the Windsor Framework. 75% rated their knowledge as low, and many reported that they had simply stopped trading with Northern Ireland due to perceived cost, complexity or risk. This aligns with what our members in Northern Ireland are telling us, that long-standing supply chain relationships are being lost because suppliers no longer see Northern Ireland as commercially viable under the current arrangements. Now, this is a serious concern for Northern Ireland's internal market connectivity and long-term economic resilience. When Northern Ireland businesses struggle to source stock from GB, or when they're told by suppliers that we don't serve Northern Ireland anymore, that's not just a logistics issue, it's a competitiveness and investment issue. But before coming here today, I thought I would go on and see why on earth businesses might find the system hard to navigate, or the support from the TSS and HMRC so inadequate. So if you'll indulge me for a moment, I'll recount what is stated on the landing page of the TSS website by way of encouraging businesses to avail of the supposed simplicity of the UK internal market scheme. It says, is your trader goods profile, brackets TGP, ready for internal market movement information, brackets IMMI? If you're a UKIMS authorised trader, you can access your TGP on TSS. Important prerequisites, your TSS EORI must be submitted to the Customs Declaration Service, brackets CDS, and you need an HMRC TGP profile at gov.uk. Once accessed, categorise your goods items within your TGP to prepare them for an IMMI. Detailed guidance can be found on the NICTA learning platform or via the TSS contact centre. In fairness, that's only a tiny fraction of the initialisms, anagrams and mnemonics that have emerged in the past 5 years and which are probably a key ingredient of why the internal market seems to be fracturing. Another area where we sought insight was dual market access. The promise to Northern Ireland businesses of being able to trade freely with both the UK and EU markets has been presented as a unique selling point of the Windsor Framework. Yet our findings show that this remains largely theoretical for many firms. Awareness is low, with only a small proportion reporting that they feel they understand and have been able to take advantage of dual market access, whilst 88% report that they didn't think the concept of dual market access is being adequately explained or promoted by the UK government or the Northern Ireland Executive. Beyond trade, we also explored business sentiment. The survey showed that 56% of those affected by the Windsor Framework are not confident or only slightly confident in shaping their business strategy for the next 12 months. Many respondents indicated that they were investing less, pausing plans, or focusing on survival rather than growth. Critically, much of this is not opposition to the Windsor Framework per se, but about how it is being implemented and communicated. We find that many businesses feel overwhelmed by the number of public bodies involved, with uncertainty about whom they should contact, which rules apply, and what changes may be on the horizon. There's clearly a need for a more coordinated, plain English guidance that focuses on communicating answers to real business needs. Despite this, there is potential. With targeted reforms including clearer guidance, improved support services and efforts to make dual market access meaningful, the situation can be improved. We've developed 12 recommendations informed directly by the evidence that can help make the Windsor Framework more workable and reduce burdens on small businesses. We can go through these, but to highlight just 4, they include improving clarity and consistency of official guidance, enhancing the trader support service to be more responsive and user-friendly, UK government, as well as the Northern Ireland Executive, actively promoting dual market access with practical examples, and improving cross-government coordination on regulatory divergence. Importantly, these are not demands for renegotiation. They're realistic, proportionate measures that reflect what businesses are telling us they now need to trade confidently, plan and grow. Chair, I'd like to finish by emphasising that small businesses want to comply, want to trade and want to thrive under whatever framework is in place, but they need policymakers and officials to meet them halfway, to support them with clear, stable and fair processes. We look forward to discussing our findings further and supporting efforts to make the trading environment more workable for small firms across Northern Ireland.
Thank you very much indeed, Roger, and to your colleagues. This was clearly a huge piece of work and provides really important evidence. So I just want to pick up on some of them. So if I read your report correctly, Roger, 14% of Northern Ireland based businesses believe that they're benefiting from dual market access. Is that correct?
I'll pick that on up. I think the problem is that for 30 odd years, businesses in Northern Ireland have had dual market access. You know, since the single market came into being, that's what has been the norm. So I don't think there's a clear perception of having this special access. That's just what we've always had for businesses here that want to trade either with GB or into Europe. For us, I think the real opportunity of dual market access is for businesses from outside of the UK and Europe to come in and be based here. And I think that's where Invest in I has certainly been stepping up and focusing its efforts, and executive ministers too. But I think what we're finding is that the real concern is that actually, although everybody, you know, from the First Minister downwards recognises the benefits and value of dual market access, one of those markets is increasingly closing. That's what the evidence is telling us. It's the fact that the UK market, ironically, is the one that's becoming difficult to engage with, as evidenced by the survey. I think that's where we need to bring our focus to make sure that that one remains just as open as the EU market.
Unfettered access to the UK internal market doesn't exist in the eyes of business. the vast majority who have responded to your survey?
I think that it's first of all it's asymmetric. That we found a very significant proportion of businesses in GB saying that coming to Northern Ireland was just too difficult, too awkward, and that summary I gave you from the TSS maybe set the reason as to why they felt that. And then there's a proportion of businesses here that are finding for various reasons dealing with GB is also problematic. So unfettered, there's clearly a lot of fetters in the way, and our challenge I think is to bring a focus on those to try and reduce them and remove them while still being able to meet the commitments under the Windsor Framework.
And then did you say 1/3 of the respondents said that there had been serious disruption to their business activity as a result of the current trading arrangements?
I did. Happy for colleagues to jump in and
yeah, so unpack. 1/3 have experienced operational disruption due to the Windsor Framework, and within the survey we had an open-ended question at the end for any additional feedback that wasn't covered within the survey, and nearly 1/4 of respondents actually took the time to input their concerns into that box, which was quite interesting from our point of view. And we were getting feedback such as businesses based in GB saying that they think it is easier to trade with the USA or Australia compared to NI. They're finding it easier to trade with those markets compared to their closest market of Northern Ireland, and that is perceived barriers. Now a lot of that comes down to communication on what the rules are, and that's something we've found over the last couple of months in particular. We've got a lot of calls from members based in GB querying how do they actually send their goods into Northern Ireland, because they find that they're getting competing advice from HMRC and the Trader Support Service. So there's a real kind of lack of joined up approach, I think, that we're seeing within the government communication, and that's one of our recommendations, is for that to be simplified and easy to access going forward.
And just if I could jump in there, in the same set, in the same question, the third had said yes, they have experienced. Another part of that was that 29% also said not yet. And I think that's another thing we need to bear in mind. At the time that we did the survey, the 1st of May deadline for B2B parcels had not yet reached. And of course, yesterday's deadline of phase 3 labelling. So it's some of the businesses who feel like they can handle that at the time they did the survey, they may not have that same opinion now, unfortunately.
How many people that responded to the survey described the new trading arrangements as the world's most exciting economic zone?
I don't recall anybody putting it into there were nearly 1/4 of businesses actually took the option to share their further reflections at the end of the survey, which is a remarkably high number, telling you their sort of lived experience is very valuable. I don't recall that being highlighted amongst them.
How many responded to the survey to say that they wanted the rigorous implementation of the Windsor Framework?
Again, I think our problem here is that in many ways the missing ingredient that made the Good Friday Agreement work was trust. That allowed people to sort of step from where they were to where they needed to be with this thing of trust. And it's not present for businesses. Businesses are not trusted in this. So everything has to be proved and verified and tested and checked. And unfortunately, it's not just computer that says no. It can be also, load being checked in the port says no. And therefore, I think that's the rigorous implementation. It's also inconsistently rigorous implementation, because sometimes you can bring something across and other times the same process will see you disrupted, and that's really unsatisfactory.
I think, we've had the Chief Executive of Invest Northern Ireland before this committee, who said that he, as Chief Executive, has seen no material benefit as a result of the new trading arrangements. We now have the FSB, the biggest representative of small businesses here in Northern Ireland, highlight the problems, so we clearly need to get a solution. Could you talk to me about your engagement with Lord Murphy to this stage, please, Roger?
Well, we met with Lord Murphy, and we also then subsequently arranged for him to meet with some of our members, because I think it's very important to actually meet and engage with the people who are having the issues, and he gave us a good amount of time on that, and we also gave him a initial sort of confidential walkthrough of this, and then subsequently sent the report when it was published, just so he's fully cited on what we have found through this. And I don't think any of us underestimate the task he has to deal with, And I think it was important that the voices of members and businesses right across the UK were fed into that process of what are they actually experiencing as opposed to how was it designed. Because if you recall back in 2021, the Northern Ireland Protocol was swept in, and FSB quite quickly mapped our membership to understand how is it working, and we found 5 distinct cohorts, ones it was working very well for, the ones who were largely unaffected, the ones who were largely unaware, the ones who were protected by grace periods, and the ones who were affected very badly. And people moved between those. They could also be in 2 of those, but there was no 6th cohort. And what we did there, along with other business organisations, was identified who's in the 5th cohort, who's this not working for. And I think the voices were sufficiently well raised over that time that led to the EU and UK saying we need to do something better, and they came up with the Windsor Framework. And that did address quite a lot of problems, but it hasn't addressed by any means all of them. And I think we need to just keep moving forward in the right spirit to say, okay, what are you trying to achieve, and how can we do that in a way that doesn't fracture one of the 2 markets that everybody says is so valuable for our businesses to have access to.
Thank you. Diana?
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation this morning, Roger. Yes, and for coming in. And I understand, in Fermanagh and South Tyrone, I'm hearing the same thing, the complexities and the disruption and the bureaucratic process that people just clearly don't understand. Just looking at the trade disruption in your survey, you say over a third had already ceased to trade rather than deal with the new compliance. In terms of what does that represent to the economy in Northern Ireland? Is that just small SMEs looking for products to bring here? Is that what kind of sum are we talking about here?
I'll let colleagues jump in and sort of add to this, because they did the hard work on this of first of all designing the survey to understand what it is that businesses are experiencing, and then put it into a format that we can sort of digest and make use of. But I think it ranged from some large firms right down to very small firms, just feeling that for large firms, I think they were able to take the view it's not a sufficiently big part of our business to make that effort, and they could walk away from it without really feeling the pain. For very small firms, they felt it was just too complex and difficult and costly to rely on, so they walked away from it. And there's some evidence out there, and anecdotal evidence of just how painful a decision that is for somebody who's got relationships with businesses and consumers here and decides actually we can't continue with that because of the process and the bureaucracy.
And on the other side, in Northern Ireland, can you measure the impact that is having?
Well, we haven't sought, simply because we did this when we did it, and further restrictions have come in since then. But to give you an example of that, I think within the first few hours of the 1st of May, restrictions on business-to-business parcels coming in, we had a phone call from one of our members who said that his main supplier, it's a very, very good delicatessen with a huge product range, most of which is sourced in GB. And one of their main suppliers said, look, we just can't do this anymore. It's too complex for us. We're going to have to stop supplying you. So suddenly, at very short notice, they were faced with this massive disruption to their business model. Now, fortunately, I think they have found a different route back to getting that same supplier to continue to supply them. But they were distraught at what they thought was an existential threat and damage to their business just coming in just because of the way it was being implemented at such short notice.
It's really the survivability of the SMEs.
For many, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And what do you think the next step is? Who is really listening to you, do you feel?
I suppose as a large lobby organisation, our role is to identify who can do something about the problem and then bring forward the evidence rather than just the anecdote. And that's what this is part of. So we're delighted that you're now putting a spotlight onto this issue here. We've obviously been engaging with others as well. So the Northern Ireland Scrutiny Committee in the House of Lords, the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee in the House of Commons, the Windsor Framework Committee here as well, Intertrade UK, etc., etc., etc. Whoever has some sort of role in this, we're bringing forward the evidence and trying to make sure that people see that there is a problem, and then maybe look at some of the recommendations to see what the solutions might be. Do you want to add any to that?
I think one of the reasons for us taking on this research and for it being a UK-wide piece and not just Northern Ireland was that we were having discussions with others who were of the idea that the Windsor Framework was a Northern Ireland issue, mm-hmm. and it was for Northern Ireland businesses to deal with, and we really wanted to go out and understand if GB firms were being impacted, and I think that's what this ultimately shows, that it's not just a Northern Ireland issue, it is a UK issue, there is evidence there to suggest that Northern Ireland firms are at a competitive disadvantage compared to competitors in GB, and we're starting to see that. We're getting calls from members who are UK-wide businesses, so they have premises in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, England, and they had put forward plans to invest in their Northern Ireland branch in Lisburn, and they've now decided that they're going to extend their premises in Stirling because of the complexity. And that's not, one business sending goods to another business. That is internal business trade, if that makes sense. It shouldn't be that complicated if it's within the same organisation. But that's just one example of how investment is being stopped in Northern Ireland, and they're deciding to put their money elsewhere. And that's something we hear most weeks. We get calls from our members. But I think it's really important to show that this is not just a Northern Ireland issue, and there needs to be communication UK-wide for businesses to understand what changes have come into place or are going to. As Lorna pointed out, 29% of businesses anticipate some sort of challenges in the coming months if they haven't experienced so yet.
Yeah. Just to add to that point, the phone calls from members are from Northern Ireland and across the water too. I get phone calls probably once a week with some sort of Windsor Framework issue, and more phone calls from colleagues across the water because businesses in Northern Ireland, typically they're telling us we're feeling the effects. This effect is kind of being put on us, our suppliers pulled out, that type of thing. But then it's across the water, they're saying we can't cope. How do we do this? Who do we turn to? Et cetera, et cetera. It does really come into this whole wider picture of it's not working.
Okay, thanks for your work. Thank you for that, Jen.
Emma. Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks to you all for coming in and giving your presentation. And I think the really helpful bit about your presentation was the recommendations, which I would imagine all members across the committee will support. Diana sort of touched upon it there in terms of who can actually affect change here. And obviously this is a result of an international agreement. So we have an important role here to lobby and support our small businesses, which is what we want to do. I think, because I'm not, to be honest, in the constituency getting this. I'm not getting businesses contacting me with these complaints. I'm not getting consumers contact me. I've heard anecdotally people talking about fruit seeds, and that's the only thing that I've heard of, to be honest with you. Actually, in terms of the parcels, apparently there's a very creative individual across the border who has started taking parcels on one side of the border and then charging people to deliver them around the country. You'll always find an opportunist somewhere along the line. I suppose the question I would ask in terms of the conversations that you are having with those that you represent who can no longer import a particular product that they need from the UK, are they, because we know obviously trade with the 26 counties has increased since Brexit. I know there have been estimations that an 80% increase there. Are they being able to access those products from elsewhere, or how is that working?
I think that, I suppose the issue is that we should all be really concerned. If we're saying that dual market access is the great opportunity, which, say, First Minister and every other minister, I think, has said that, if that is the case, then we need to be really concerned about the fact that there's distortions coming in, that those two markets aren't actually open to us. So anybody that's distorting their trade, having to go somewhere else, because trade is like water. It finds the easiest route, and for the last lot of decades it's found the easiest route, and suddenly along came Brexit, came the Northern Ireland Protocol, came the Windsor Framework, and these are all just new barriers put in the way, so the water is having to flow different ways, and when it does that, it adds cost and it adds time and it removes choice. So if people are finding different places to source their products, that's what business does. But it doesn't mean that we've got the system working correctly, because we're seeing one of those two markets disrupted and closed off in part. So I think that's where we need to keep the focus. And I take your point that not everybody thinks to come to us to tell us they've got a problem, and they'll go to their elected representatives, or they'll go to Invest in Ireland, they go to wherever, or they just get on with it. So that's why this, I think, was to go out and actually ask, tell us about your problems, give us the actual evidence that we need, rather than just say we've had another call and another call.
Yeah, Chair, if I can just, so I suppose the point that you're making around disruption to markets and all of that, I suppose in the wake of Brexit and then the implementation of the WF, one of the things that struck me were the statistics we were hearing around the importing of milk into the north from Britain, and I just thought it was absolutely insane when we're at a time where we're talking even in terms of our targets around climate and food safety and ensuring that people, supporting local producers and ensuring that people are eating correctly and all of that. The idea that we would have milk farmers in the north of Ireland and in the south who are struggling, who are facing increasing pressures from across the board, and we would be taking milk into the country and then exporting it. It just, to me, it doesn't make sense. So I suppose it's that, albeit the disruption of a market is never going to be a positive thing, but if it's the case that we have businesses now who are taking a product from elsewhere where it's cheaper, where it's easier, where it's environmentally causing less impact, and where it makes more sense for it to be travelling 10 mile along a road than through the air, is that the experience that businesses are having? Are they?
I think that some businesses who had their supply chains focused on the GB market have adapted and got their products from elsewhere. I think that's definitely happened, and some businesses have benefited and are trading more with Ireland. I think the issue is that there are some firms who can't as easily adapt their supply chains. If it's something in particular, that they get from a GB business, they can't necessarily get it from another market. So I think, our research, we try to show that we understand that not every business is negatively impacted. There are just some that are, and we're trying to shine a light on those businesses. But I think that, decreasing trade with GB shouldn't come at a cost. We want to increase trade with all our markets.
Of course.
That's definitely something that everyone drives towards. For those businesses that can adapt, that's fair. For some that can't, they are experiencing increased costs and are not as competitive. So I think we need to make sure that businesses can trade as freely and openly as possible with GB and with Ireland, so that they have the choice to pick their suppliers.
I think it's specific to different products, and that's what I'm trying to get to the bottom of, because I'm not hearing this as a constituency MLA. And the agri-food, the amount of agri-food production that we have and the reliance we have, particularly in my own constituency, that was something that really struck me, because to me, a child in school would understand that it does not make sense to import either meat or dairy product from elsewhere if you can get it locally, for a whole range of reasons. For these are perishable items for a start. So to me that didn't make sense, and all the problems that we've had down through the years with even disease control and all of that issue. And obviously we're exporting, my father's a sheep farmer, we export lamb, and that's because we don't have the market here for it, that I would argue we maybe should. But even in the context of the conversation we've had here in recent years around the climate change bill and the targets that we have there, I definitely wouldn't want us to get into a position in the north of Ireland where we're going down herd reduction and then we're importing beef from elsewhere, where ultimately it's adding to our carbon footprint. So it's that sort of thing. Obviously we want to increase our market everywhere, but if we're reducing our market importing a product from overseas and we're increasing it from somewhere where it is less damaging, to me that probably makes sense. And it's just trying to get that understanding of where exactly the problems are, what sectors are negatively impacted here, because I'm not receiving it myself.
I think that it seems to be, I think you make a lot of really interesting points there. It seems to me that we shouldn't be determining that by a bad system. We need to make the system work, and then the market can work, and you can see where's your carbon footprint best served and all of that. So, but at the moment it's not working like that. So other things that people have to take into account are, for instance, currency fluctuations. So you might be able to source it south of the border, but you'll be paying in euros there. So there's all of these things to take into account. I think we can't legislate in a way that takes account of all of those. We just got to try and get the really best system to let the market actually operate fluently, take on board. So amount of effort that people are putting into mapping their carbon footprint now, because their customers need that and want to know that, and they're part of a supply chain. So all of that, the points you raised in the climate change bill, I think are very, very firmly on the radar of businesses. We were speaking at an event just on Thursday about how smaller businesses need to map their carbon footprint to play their part in that. But I think that can't be a solution to a dysfunctional market, which is what we've got. And I think that's why we need to just keep the focus on not who's changed their supply chains, but why have they changed them, and how do we address the problems that drove them to do that.
Thanks, Chair. And I think just to reiterate, the recommendations that you've laid out are really sensible, I think, and we would be supportive of them. And if we could receive some detail around the exact sectors that are impacted, and urge your members, any of them in Middlesbrough, to contact. I'm always open to hearing that.
I mean, and to your point about not hearing negative impact, that's great. By no means do we want people to be shouting and screaming about bad experiences. If they're not having them, that's perfect. As Roger said, there is the 5 cohorts, and businesses are ebbing and flowing in between. And only, I think it was 28% of our respondents said that there was no significant impact to their business. So that's good. We're happy about that. But we also need to divert our attention to this combined 61% who said they were very negatively or somewhat negatively impacted. And only 2% said they were somewhat positively. No one said very positively. So it is a wide range. But I think where our report focuses and where we would like to focus is trying to really make it work, as Roger has said.
Yeah, I haven't been hearing that. And ordinarily, if a business have a problem, they contact their elected reps. So I need to understand what exactly.
We'll get them to drop you a note.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for coming to the committee today. If it wasn't so serious, it would be comical in a lot of this. I've seen clearly the impacts. I hear it from businesses daily, and I think your report and your survey is probably the first landmark survey in terms of business attitudes towards the Windsor Framework, which is really, really important, because as was mentioned by Rachel, capturing that GB business base and their attitudes is so important, and it's quite often lost on so many elected representatives. At the Windsor Framework Committee, I constantly ask the question, what is the level of trade between GB and Northern Ireland on this particular issue? And what is those businesses saying about how this regulation or new EU law will affect upon them? And quite often we're lost because we don't have the database or the information to ascertain what the impact is. And quite often what you see happening there is a new EU law or amended law coming into effect without any real consideration as to what the real life impact is for the GP consumer, or for the GB business to the Northern Ireland consumer. Many of the business, we're a nation of small businesses. So many of those that are facing the impact of the Windsor Framework, it's a downstream business. So if they can't get from their parent business in GB to supply their business, ultimately that business has to go look elsewhere or else discontinue a certain product. I think anybody that thinks that there hasn't been an impact is burying their head in the sand. Whether it's online, whether it's with businesses down the supply chain. It's very interesting what you say, Lorna, in terms of that percentage, 58 of those trading moderate to significant challenges. But you anticipate that to grow because of the changing environment in terms of some other sectors being taken up by that. So I suppose just last week I had an issue, and I'm interested to hear if you've had correspondence on this. Those second-hand machinery, tractor dealers, they're small businesses. I've had 2 businesses on this week, small traders, that have second-hand tractors sitting at the port in GB because they cannot access Northern Ireland without plant health certificate and other certification. So certification demanded by a foreign entity to restrict movement of something so basic like that to a Northern Ireland market. Are you starting to hear businesses in Northern Ireland, smaller consumers starting to really bite into, as derogations move away, the real life impact that this is causing to their business?
Well, I'll pick that up because the plant health label one came to the fore on the 2nd of October 2023. I think the 1st of October was a Sunday. The Windsor Framework came in, and the 2nd of October we got our first phone call from members saying this is a problem. And we engaged the Cabinet Office at the time and Number 10, and we took 6 months working quietly behind the scenes with the Farmers Union to try and get some sort of resolution, which we eventually got in 6 months after that one issue over that one product category was identified as being a problem, and we got that high level engagement on it. And we thought, okay, we've moved forward, but it does seem in recent days that we're now moving back again because there seems to be a greater intensity of checking and regulatory compliance demand being placed on those businesses, and that should be a concern, not least because of the agreement that was reached on the 19th of May, which you would like to have thought was going to usher us into a more I wouldn't say light touch, but a regime which recognises the standards that we're all operating.
So that's why I think how bureaucratic and nonsensical it is, particularly if, as has been suggested, albeit not negotiated, and we know what subsequent agreements have, or previous agreements have meant in terms of what they've said as to the actual reality. But if an SPS agreement, as the UK and EU outlined, was to be come to fruition, essentially you would imagine an issue like second-hand tractors wouldn't be an issue at all when it comes to movement from GB to NI. Would it be right? So what is the point in moving ahead with something that you're essentially talking about negotiating in the autumn?
Well, I think that the issue was originally quite restricted under the Northern Ireland Protocol and was identified as such, and that was why one of the key things one of many key things in the Windsor Framework was to identify second-hand agriculture and forestry machinery and specifically highlight how it was going to be different under the Windsor Framework as opposed to under the Northern Ireland Protocol. And yet here we are again, the problem being raised again by the way that agreement that was reached back in 2023 is now being implemented and applied. So that's why, I suppose, to the point that Lorna makes about people saying the uncertainty that they feel they're operating in, they can't look ahead for 12 months and plan with any degree of certainty, is because even the existing rule book seems to be being applied differentially over time, and that's really unacceptable. Sorry, can I just pick up on another point, because it goes to the issue you're referring to the other committee there as well. And I think what we've found is that nobody that we've spoken to knows all of the bodies that has some sort of oversight on the application and enforcement of the Windsor Framework.
Yeah, and that's something I'm going to come on to. So
right.
see this survey. How many businesses responded to this survey?
778.
778,
businesses.
Okay. Diana asked a question which I thought was interesting, and maybe you don't have this data, but in one of your questions in the survey it talked about that there's been a percentage of trade, 14% I think it is, that's already been discounted. 30 maybe, was it? 34% have already ceased trading rather than deal with the new compliance structures. You don't have a breakdown of what that figure would be in terms of trade?
Broken down in what respect?
Well, you've said that, so what would that 34% represent in terms of a figure? In terms of the financial figure?
If I recall, and jump in while you check, but I think that was about 32% were actually GB disengaging with Northern Ireland, and 2% Northern Ireland disengaging with GB. So the combined total of those, there was a vast amount of data came in this report. So what we tried to do is present it in and there are a couple of things like that where we may not have given the detail as how the 34% is comprised. But if I recall, it was 32 and 2 who had disengaged from each other's market.
Yeah, the 34 pertains both directions.
240.
Okay, thank you. The last point for me on the dual, this point really annoys me actually. It's about the dual market access and the best of both worlds that were sold. Because, and I think, Roger, your theory on the water levels is very interesting, and obviously business will always go to the easiest point of access. But the problem that I have is that it's exactly as you outline. The concept of dual market access means equal access. It means that you're facing the exact same challenges and opportunities on both sides. So it's an equal playing field. That's how it was sold to Northern Ireland businesses. But would you accept, and does your report, I feel, clearly show that to enable dual market access, you're actually sacrificing access to one of those markets, and in particular, in this case, the GB market. As the funnel, in theory, should open to the EU market, the funnel closes for GB businesses accessing Northern Ireland without disruption, without increased costs and bureaucracy, and therefore ultimately discontinuing their trade.
I think the way I would just respond to that is that we're a representative body, so it's not our view, it's what our members tell us.
What's this report
saying? We'd had lots of anecdote that has suggested that. We thought it was time to get evidence on it, and this report, I think, is a big sample size. It brings forward evidence that a significant number of businesses are finding that it's too difficult, that the rulebook in this part of the dual market is not working well for them, and therefore they're turning off, they're distorting the way they operate. That's why this is unacceptable, and we need to bring a focus on what needs to be done.
You mentioned two comments in your survey. Businesses saying that it's easier to trade with Australia and easier to trade with the USA than it is to trade with GB to Northern Ireland. That indicates there's a serious problem. Would you now accept, would the FSB accept, and I know they were more nuanced around the time of the Windsor Framework, but would you accept that the words of whether it be the Prime Minister or others that came to sell it, Northern Ireland was sold a pup?
The way I would look at it is this. Very often in life you can solve your problems with money. And so far we've spent well north of £500 million on the Trader Support Service to try to make the UK's internal market run fairly smoothly. And despite that vast amount of treasure being committed and the fact that the TSS is out to tender again for another contract, despite all of that, you've still got 34% of businesses who responded to the survey saying it's not working for them. So that's, I suppose, a long answer to the specific illustration you give, that being easier to trade with the US and Australia. We can't stand over that because it was just one business telling us that. But it was an interesting anecdote that they put in, that that's their experience, their lived experience. We're not saying that all businesses would find it easier to trade with America or Australia, but that was somebody just taking the time to tell us what their experience of it is.
Big issue has been parcels, business to business. The at-risk test is entirely opaque. Quite often what you're finding is a large section of businesses are falling into that category because they cannot categorically guarantee that it will not end up elsewhere, even though they're probably likely that it won't. Do you believe that should be scrapped?
I think we were always frustrated that when all addresses here have a BT postcode, and it was therefore very easy to identify what was coming to Northern Ireland, irrespective of any potential onward risk. That was frustrating that didn't get more value attached to it. And the second thing, I suppose, is go back to my point earlier about trust. When a business trades, it charges VAT, it pays out VAT, and at the end of the quarter, it declares what it has done and it submits that, and it either reclaims or it pays, and it is trusted to do that. And every so often you will go in and have tax authorities will go and check it, but they are trusted to get on with trading and then reporting afterwards. I think we moved so far away from that in the development of the arrangements we've got. The business is not trusted, and therefore we've got a bureaucracy for how do you manage people that you don't trust. And that is what's at the root of the question you ask on parcels, is you have to declare so much up front. And it doesn't really matter if you say, oh, well, my carrier will do that for me. You still need to provide the information to the carrier to do it for you. So we've put in place this tremendous bureaucratic barrier to doing normal trade within this one part of the market. And that really should be exercising everybody and be a cause of real concern, and focusing on how do we improve that rather than how do we excuse it.
Yeah. Is the process of applying to the UK internal market scheme too consuming and bureaucratic for your members? Is that what's spurred out in the survey?
I don't know if it comes out in the survey, does it?
Not explicitly, and I think what does come out in the survey is that this is a cumulative burden. It's not one element, and as we've addressed, business is resilient. You know, they do want to comply, but it is getting to the stage where it's just too much. Do you know, you mentioned their UKIMs and B2B parcels, GPSR, having to have a representative in Northern Ireland, and the list goes on. Do you know, maybe a business can stand and say, yes, I'm okay to do this one element, but all the other elements, when combined, it really does paint a big, burdensome picture. And businesses are telling us that it's too stressful, the risk element is too stressful, and it's not worth their small market in Northern Ireland.
Can I just add on one point on that? And this is going to anecdote rather than evidence, but one business saying to us, if the UK internal market scheme is meant to facilitate trade within the UK, why do we need a scheme? Why isn't our VAT number just sufficient to say we're part of that scheme? Why do we need to have something else that has got a slow response rate? So it was put on our radar very early on, I think again on the 2nd or 3rd of May, about a business that was expecting its supplies. They didn't arrive. They phoned up the supplier, and the supplier said, well, you're not a member of UKIMS and neither are we, so we can't send it to you. So that business then applied, but it took something like 20 days before they got their UKIMS number through, despite the fact that they're paying VAT and they're already registered with all the authorities they need to be. So I think that was an illustration of the complexity that we've overlaid on what should be a relatively simple process and would be very easy if trust were a feature within it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
David.
Thank you, Roger and Lorna. Rachel, thanks for coming in. There's a lot of good stuff in here. I want to pick up a couple of things. I appreciate everything Federation to my background and there. You said the UK market. I would just want to pick up a few things because there's a couple of things here been said that I just want to just clarify. You said the UK market is closing and that needs to be addressed. Yet GB to Northern Ireland sales increased last year by 12.4%, and Northern Ireland to GB trade figures increased by slightly over 14%. How does that two marry?
Do you have data as to how many businesses were trading, or just the value of the sales that they were achieving? That's the
value of trade.
The value of trade, okay. Not the number of businesses. Okay. And I think therein lies part of the problem. We went out to get evidence to support what we were hearing. I think there are I'm slightly surprised that it actually took FSB to be the first to go out and see what's the UK saying, that none of the departments seem to have done this, or none of the UK agencies or anybody else to actually understand the lived experience. So both can be true. Okay,
I'm not dismissing what you've done, and I don't want any barriers, and I want to I'm going past that, but we're talking about 778 people. I'm concerned that one business said, it's finding it hard to go to Australia, and that somehow then become policy, and that's becoming a thing said and used as one guy said once.
That's why I caveated that was anecdote.
But it's been used, Roger. It's been used and then created and exported. There's 778 businesses respond to this. Frankly, there's 5.5 million businesses in the UK. That's 0.0001%.
What do you regard as statistically significant in a survey?
Well, no. No,
can I ask that question? What do you regard as statistically significant?
How many people in Northern Ireland responded to the? How many of those were from Northern Ireland businesses?
13%.
So 100.
Which is statistically significant. Typically you'll find that somewhere between 500 and 1,000 is regarded as a robust statistical sample.
I'm not dismissing the thing. I agree. I think it's welcome. I'm welcome that. I'm just saying I'm concerned that narratives have been formed on very, very small numbers of one person said this.
No. It's 34% said that they de-engaged with the other market, not the one who said it was easier to deal with somewhere else.
One person said they found it to go to Australia.
That was just one example from the qualitative responses.
But it's now been used as a narrative.
By whom?
Well, it's just been said.
And actually,
so colleagues, I understand that this is for some people a politically important issue, but listen, we're here in terms of questioning a witness in terms of the report. Members are open to challenge and give their view in relation to the interpretation of the report, but let's do that in a respectful manner.
Then let's move on. What trading advantage does a business in Northern Ireland have over a business in Scotland?
I would say that depends on what they trade in. So, and with whom they trade. So theoretically, they have access to the whole of the UK market and the whole of the EU market. But in practical terms, what we're discovering is that a significant number are impacted. So if it's a business that's trading here that gets its supplies from Scotland, and the business in Scotland is having difficulty sending those supplies to here, then does it have an advantage? It just depends. And if I was able to give you one answer, that would just be an anecdote. It wouldn't be evidence.
So as I'm out and about in my area, I was in a business in Acklee last week. I was in a business, Andrews Ingredients. All have an advantage of being able to sell south and within GB. Actually, Andrews have, and I'm not picking this up, that people are getting there are barriers. Sorry, there are barriers on that people with deliveries and different things like that. But within a lot of business, we're not hearing that. There's been things said about dual market access. Do we have an advantage? A business in Northern Ireland have an advantage over a business calling manufacturing a product to export?
It ought to, but the system is working in such a way that at the moment that many of them clearly don't, and I think that's why we need to bring our focus on what do we need to do.
What's that barrier?
Well, it's the illustrations, I suppose, about the paperwork, the bureaucracy, the complexity, the checks, the cost of compliance.
So the risk of non-compliance as well.
The non-compliance?
The risk of non-compliance.
Whenever I'm with business owners, right, and I'm with them regularly, and in the last week I've been with 3 or 4 companies in my own area, and they're always so positive. They are the most positive people on this world. You're an entrepreneur because you see things better. The better. Why is that? You bring out actually in the report about the communication of dual market access, about selling. Why is that not the positivity, not the focus of how do we make things? It's the negative. And there's a narrative that I'm concerned about here. That is rather than the positive of what business owners are actually experience or actually live. They live that life. Why does that not come through on reports like that?
I think just to say, when we went out, this was obviously a survey that has gone out titled about the Windsor Framework. So the people who have responded to it are people who are interested in the topic or are probably having issues. That is what you'd expect with any survey you go out with. People will respond if they're interested in the issue. So not every business in Northern Ireland is being impacted. We try to address that in the results, but we're saying that there are businesses that are impacted, and our recommendations are mainly around improved communication. It's not about making significant changes. It's just making sure that if you're a business and you are having issues, there's somewhere you can go to get clarity and information. It's not necessarily about giving businesses support or making massive changes to what's already happening. It's just about ensuring that everyone has access to equal information and has that guidance to make sure that they are, as Lorna said, complying with any barriers or regulation.
I completely agree with everything you've just said. The better, and the concern I had before is that the narrative is not that, because this is a small amount of businesses who do have issues, and there are, and I'm not dismissing any of those, and I agree with all it. The difficulty I have is that becomes a narrative of all, and it's not. But so that communication bit, what should that look like, or what can we do? Maybe it's a better to because a lot of this stuff is between the UK and EU. It's not in our remit. But what the communication bit, if we're to do something to improve that as a committee or as a department, or lobby a minister in the department, what does that look like?
I think there's several things. The first is that we need to somebody to map all of the bodies that have some sort of oversight into this. So to give an example, the week leading up to the 1st of May, Mr. Buckley's referred to the parcels change that came in on that day. The week leading up to that, we got guidance note through from HMRC with a huge number of links to how to do this, how to do that, how to do the other. And then it said, if you're sending SPS parcels, DEFRA will publish the guidance. So there was one part of UK government sending out how to do it, with a big bit obviously missing a week before the change was due to come in. So we need to understand who has the authority over every aspect of the operation of this, and then see how is that communicated, how is it coordinated, so as businesses aren't finding things like that out a week before the change comes in, or in some cases maybe after the changes come in. And then we need to work out how do you then simplify that and communicate that much better. So we'd originally called for an Office of Regulatory Divergence to understand where the EU or the UK are maybe moving apart from each other. Then you can consider what you might do about that. But you need to understand where that might be. But the sort of front end of that needs to be something that will communicate to businesses anywhere. How do I engage with that market? What do I need to do? And as you heard from the landing page of the TSS, at the moment it's immensely complicated and not welcoming. So I'm tempted to respond to your invitation there, but I'm conscious that all of those examples you have are anecdotes, and what we've tried to do is bring evidence on the basis of going out to survey caveated with Rachel's point that people will engage with that survey if it's something that they feel exercises them in some way or other, but it's still far too substantial a sector to be set aside in any way, and I hope nobody is going to do that, because what we're trying to do is galvanise everybody to the point you made at the start, Chair. What do we want to do about it? Who's going to do it? That's, as a lobbying organisation, we want everybody to own the problem, and then we can maybe focus on the solutions.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to point out there's a very small number of people on this survey that have responded, and they are most likely the people that are affected. And that is, you're talking about 100 businesses or whatever.
That's representative.
Yeah. But of the 34% of the 778 had disengaged from the market, and that's the problem here. That's the issue. Yeah. Not just to segment it down. It's the fact that over a third of all of those who responded had this issue. Because, so to take for example our delicatessen, his problem here, happy trader, really successful business, tremendous customer base. His problem was by one of those in GB deciding we're not engaging with the Northern Ireland market anymore. So that's why it's our problem, irrespective of where whether we see the source of the problem being here or in GB. That was causing a problem for a Northern Ireland business.
And if I could come in quickly on your communication point, part of what we're hearing is that we just need simplification. The communication potentially is out there, but businesses just don't have the time and they're not able to find it. 80% of our respondents said it was either very difficult or difficult to find that information. That's quite a big number. People, they don't have the time in the day to sit through all the links, all the redirects to find the specific point that is relevant to them. So I think the communication needs to be simplified.
Just to say, sorry, the reason we went out to survey was that we were getting the calls from businesses to say that there were issues, so we wanted to investigate it. Obviously, if we're getting calls about an issue, then we're going to do research into it and try and put forward recommendations to try and solve some of those issues. But I definitely appreciate the fact that not every business is impacted by the Windsor Framework, and we have not tried to put that across. We've tried to caveat that it is a survey, it's a snapshot at a period in time, but it does show that there are some issues, and as an organisation it is our job to try and resolve some of those for businesses that are impacted.
Right, thank you. When was this report published?
Last Tuesday.
What engagement has the Department for the Economy had with you since its publication?
None since then.
They have reached out.
Sorry, yes, but we haven't actually
formally engaged yet.
So the opening is there.
Mm-hmm.
The Minister or the Special Advisor hasn't been in direct contact with you?
No.
Just the Department.
Okay.
Just briefly, if I could. Look, this happens in all aspects of government and daily life in the Assembly and different committees. There's certain topics which will affect certain people, and you're reflecting that, and we really do appreciate you taking the time to do that. The point, and it's maybe with our Windsor Framework Committee head on, what is the level of membership across the UK for FSB, so in England, Scotland and Wales?
I'll need to reverse that out, because across the UK it's 150,000, we've about 6,000 here.
It's just one thing that we're finding very difficult is to get feedback to the Windsor Framework Committee as to issues that are being faced or going to face. Is there a solution there that you perhaps could be part of?
I think there is, but this goes back to how you go about the task that you've got, and I think that the Windsor Framework Committee has been ill-served by the job it's been given and so on. So we've been approached on a number of occasions to give a response on an issue, and the trouble is, for us to give a response we need to do it on the basis of evidence, not just anecdotes. So if you come to us and say that the EU is proposing to change this regulation, how will it affect your members? Our process at that point is then to go to a group of representatives of that sector, get their input so as we can then shape it and develop an informed survey, then go out with that to the wider membership, get their responses, then do a piece of work on it, come back forward, and then share that with you so that you can make an informed decision. That takes time. So that's why we're calling for this Office of Regulatory Divergence, sitting with all the heft of UK government, because it's UK government that signed the deal with the EU, not Stormont. Yeah. That's where the responsibility lies, to understand what are the implications of that deal, and then to cascade down the information in a timely way so that committees and stakeholders and businesses can actually understand it and respond to it, and that's the problem we've got at the moment. So again, we're talking about where are we at with things. Veterinary medicines still aren't resolved. So we're never dealing with a constant that people can plan on the basis of, to the point Ms. Sheeran was making earlier about the transfer of stuff going back and forward, agri-product. We'll have to see how does that get resolved. By the end of the year, does it get resolved? If it doesn't, what are the implications? So we're not dealing with something that's set in stone here. It's fluid.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, and colleagues, thank you very much for your evidence session and for the evidence that you provided to the committee. It's very much appreciated. Peter.
Some members are the committee content to write to FSB just seeking further information on the sectoral impact, and also just some information which I think they actually did provide around the percentage and the description of those organisations which are disengaging with the trading with Northern Ireland that are in GB. Secondly, then, is committee content to write to the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, indicating the committee's unanimous support for FSB's recommendations, which are around things like a reduction in bureaucracy, provision of one-to-one support, provision of a single source of information on Windsor Framework developments, communication and exploitation of the benefits of dual market access, further EU and UK agreements to address Windsor Framework pain points.
I don't think we can say that we unanimously agree, because we don't know where some of them will end up, essentially. So what could be interpreted as a recommendation, the ultimate solution might be different than what individual parties or members may think. But certainly we're supportive of the thrust from my perspective as to where this the challenges that it faces.
Supportive of the thrust then.
Yeah.
Chairperson, would the committee also be content just to copy this to the House of Lords Northern Ireland Scrutiny Committee, because they, and actually the previous letter as well, because they will be talking to the relevant ministers. We'll be writing to the Minister for Constitutional Relations, as the chairperson suggested, but if you also copied in that committee, they'll actually be talking to the other relevant ministers too, if you're happy.
See as well that just when we're writing to the FSB for the further information regarding the sectors involved, when Jonathan asked the question around the figures, I thought I had actually missed that in the briefing pack, because it refers to percentages, a reference to the exact number of people who took part in the survey, and that as in terms of the context, the number of businesses we have in the north.
Okay, and that what I was thinking of was asking for the money. As well as the number of businesses and number of people. So yeah, just to get a bit more background on what that means. So
I suppose I was looking at that discontinued trade. What is that worth?
Mm-hmm.
That's I suppose from the survey.
Revenue to the economy.
And then we always it's a survey. So what is that? If it was representative, if it's spun out, what would it look like?
So we've got FSB, we've got writing to the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, copying the House of Lords and Scrutiny Committee. Could I suggest to members that what FSB said at the end there was about an Office for Regulatory Divergence? There's a thing called the Office for the Internal Market, and they produced a report which did not specifically comment on the Windsor Framework. Interesting. So what the committee could do is write to that. They're part of the CMA, the Competition and Markets Authority, suggesting that they produce such a survey which might actually break things down for sectors, because that seems to be what they're saying, is that maybe globally there might not be that much impact, but for particular sectors in Northern Ireland and in GB there might be a bigger effect. So
I think that's a good idea, Kevin.
Yeah.
Content to do that. And then, sorry members, finally, I put into your packs there correspondence from Net Company. Now, they are actually putting together a bid to tender for the Trusted Trader Support Service. I would suggest the committee not engage with them, because that's a tender. And just the members may well have been speaking to them themselves in their own capacity, and that's up to them. So just content to just note that, and I will go back to them in those terms.
Great. Okay, and I know Diana has to go, so I'm going to skip forward for 1 second to industrial training levy before we lose our quorum.
We should have 5 though, even when Diana goes.
What should David declare?
Thank you, Chairperson.
So I'm just going to move to item 9. Yeah. Okay. So item 9 is the industrial training levy. Okay. So the department has laid a statutory rule entitled SR 110/2025, the Industrial Training Levy Construction Industry Order Northern Ireland 2025. The rule is subject to negative resolution procedure in the Assembly and will come into effect on the 31st of August 2025. The committee considered the related proposals on the 11th of June and was content for the department to make the rule. The laid rule is understood to not deviate from the original proposal. The rule enables Construction Training Industry Board to raise funding through a levy on employers in the industry. The board is to encourage the adequate training of those employed or intending to be employed in the construction industry in Northern Ireland. That is funded through the statutory levy, which is determined by the percentage of the payroll costs of employers in the industry. The levy rate of 0.55% remains the same, at which was applied during the preceding period. An employer will be exempt from the levy where the relevant earnings are less than £80,000. The levy is to be imposed in the period 1 September 25 and will end 31 August 26. Members have any questions? If not, I'll put to the meeting that the Committee for the Economy has considered the statutory rule SR 110/2025, the Industrial Training Levy Construction Industry Order Northern Ireland 2025, and subject to the report of the ESR has no objection to that rule. Are members content? Great, thank you very much, Dan. I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, back then, members, to our next evidence session. Our colleagues from Raise and invite you forward. Thank you so much for coming along. We have Rachel and Michael, who are both very well known to the committee, who are going to give us a overview in relation to the important sector of the credit union movement here in Northern Ireland. And I'm delighted to hand over to you at this stage.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. I'll make a start. So, the briefing in front of you really fell out of some queries from a previous paper that we did on credit unions, and really it asked 3 questions. The first was the prevalence of credit unions in the UK and the Republic of Ireland. The second one was about information on financial exclusion and how credit unions can help financially excluded people. And the third one was about Barnett consequentials arising from any funding for credit unions in GB. So I'm going to briefly go over the first 2 points and then pass over to Rachel, who's going to cover the Barnett consequential issue. So really, as we thought, credit unions are more prevalent in Northern Ireland than elsewhere. And figure 2 on page 7 of the paper gives you the percentage of adults in Northern Ireland that are members of a credit union. And you can see 44% of adults in Northern Ireland are members of a credit union, and that equates roughly to 650,000 people. So in Scotland, only 9% of adults are members of a credit union, and in England and Wales, you've got 2 and 3% adult membership. Now, there are in the Republic of Ireland, there are 206 credit unions registered in the Republic, and across Ireland, including Northern Ireland, the membership stands at 3.6 million members. So moving on to financial exclusion. So financial exclusion can really affect people throughout any stage of their lives. And age, education, disability, digital capability and income are just some of the factors that can influence the level of financial exclusion that people face. So the financial excluded individuals can be described as those who are lacking in access to financial products, digital skills and financial confidence. So in every couple of years or so, the Financial Conduct Authority produce a survey of the UK Financial Lives survey, and in 2024 it found that in Northern Ireland 200,000 people had no cash savings at all, and 300,000 had less than £1,000 to draw on in emergency. So then moving on to how credit unions can help the financially excluded. You'll see in box 2 on page 13, I've listed some areas that credit unions can help. So to summarise that really, they can offer low interest loans, relatively speaking, low interest loans. They can provide access to cash and banking services. Banking services, as we know and discussed before, really that relates to GB and the Republic of Ireland, more so than Northern Ireland. They can offer community-based support. They can provide financial education and guidance, and they can reduce the reliance on high-cost credit. So that's the first two issues covered. I'm going to pass over now to Rachel for the issue of the Barnett consequentials.
Thanks, Michael. The committee requested information regarding Barnett consequentials for Northern Ireland arising from previous United Kingdom government funding allocations for credit unions in Great Britain. We reached out to the Department of Finance, and officials confirmed that the Northern Ireland Executive had actually not received any Barnett consequentials which could be identified as relating to UK government credit union support in Great Britain. Since the time of writing the paper, there have been further correspondence with the Department, and officials have confirmed the following. Policy responsibility for credit unions in Great Britain lies within the Whitehall Department for Work and Pensions. The funding announcements referenced within the paper relate to investments made by that department in England, and they reflect how they're allocating and spending their own budget, basically. These don't represent changes to the overall funding of that department, so they've just had these policies within their own budget. And as the Executive only receives Barnett consequentials arising from changes to the budget, to the overall budgets of Whitehall departments, or alternatively with new policy announcements outside of that, these announcements would not have generated any Barnett funding for the Executive, so that's the reason why we haven't actually got any Barnett consequentials to date. And if the committee's happy enough, we can update the paper just with that additional information before we publish it. And if you guys have any questions, we'd be happy to take them.
Yep. I'm going to start with Padraig.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for the presentation, the report. I think it's been really useful. And I mean, obviously I've declared my interest as a member of the credit union. I think most other people on here are as well. But I think that showcases, you know, how well resourced they are in terms of going in the areas and increasing that financial literacy. Like they did it when I was at primary school, when I was teaching, they were still doing it. And I think that's so important because it's something that isn't really prevalent in our education system. Probably needs to be more so. So I think the role they play is important. Just want to put that in record at the start. The credit union in Derry from September are starting to offer mortgages to a number of first-time homeowners, which I think is a really important and a progressive step. And I'm just wondering, in the context of that funding disparity that you've mentioned, do you see, I suppose, any issues which we can raise as part of that to do with mortgages, to do with the fact that they're offering yet another additional financial service to people who might otherwise be locked out of accessing a mortgage? Because like, I'm 29 myself, and a lot of my friends, a lot of my peers are in the process of buying homes at the minute, and I know a huge number of people who have been locked out of home ownership. And I think that this offers such an amazing opportunity for young people to get on the property ladder and to own their own home. So I'm conscious as a committee, we would like to know what we can do to actually enhance that support for the credit unions, and maybe to delve into more detail in the report that you've already provided.
Okay, well, I can certainly take that. Well, I know that the Department for the Economy consultation is ongoing at the minute, and it is due to finish on the 10th of July. In terms of mortgages, I'm not sure that I think the consultation on the not to preempt any of the legislation, but the legislation, what I've sort of read, said that and certainly by the consultation, it says that it concentrates more on developing financial services around insurance. Mortgages isn't explicitly mentioned in the consultation, so I think that's a very good point to raise, and something that the committee may want to take up with officials around whenever the legislation comes through. As I mentioned in the first briefing I think it was a few months ago, I'm not sure when, there is a wrinkle in terms of the banking element and whether or not mortgages so you need to speak to, obviously work that through with the officials, but I totally accept your point that financially excluded people in reference to mortgages would be really an area that potentially credit unions, and certainly in the south and in GB, that is certainly an area where credit unions are increasingly becoming more active. So that is something that's I would imagine would want to be addressed. And also just picking up on the consultation as well, one of the things with financially excluded people is the access to cash. And again, I mentioned it previously, is the lack of ATMs, if you like, and the access to cash. Financially excluded people rely on cash more than affluent people in society. So it's the pound, shillings and pence that the people really, financially excluded people really rely on. So anything that can boost that through the future legislation, I think would be really helpful.
Oh, absolutely. I just thought it was a relevant point given, I suppose, the context of this and what we're doing, that more and more mortgages being offered as just hitting all the targets that we're trying to meet through this. So I think it would be really beneficial, and it's possibly something we can consider through the committee. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for that. And once the call for evidence by the department is finished and publication, I think it'll be useful to try to overview some of the stuff that you've provided to us. You've also provided very helpful briefings on credit unions at the Committee for Finance, so thank you very much for that as well. But I think all members are 100% agreed that the credit union movement is a force for good here in Northern Ireland, and that legislation that strengthens their role is to be warmly welcomed. So thank you very much indeed for your presentations, greatly appreciated. Okay, Peter, anything on this?
No, I think as you've just indicated, the consultation will come back and then there'll be an opportunity. We'll seek a briefing from the department and then we can raise the issues that the member has raised.
Okay, perfect. Could I move members to correspondence at item number 10? So there's an index at page 233, members. So item 2, members, is for noting or members' content. Thank you. Item 3, members are asked to consider departmental correspondence relating to an anticipated LCM in respect of the Westminster Sustainable Aviation Fuel Bill, and the committee content to schedule a evidence session on the LCM following the summer recess. Thank you. Item 4, members are asked to consider a departmental response in respect from a Unite the Union campaign. The committee content to forward this correspondence to the for the Committee for Finance. Great, thank you. Item 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10 are all for noting members' content. Okay, thank you. Item 11, members are asked to consider a memo from the Committee for Finance in respect of the committee stage of the Administration and Financial Provisions Bill. Is the committee content to note with a departmental evidence session being scheduled? Content? Yeah, thank you. Item 12, 13, 14, 15 and 16 are all for noting or members' content. Thank you. Item 17 is an individual correspondence of the committee content that we suggest that they raise those issues directly with their local elected representatives. Okay, thank you.
Okay, members.
Agreed? Yeah. Yep. Item 18 is for noting members' content. Thank you. Item 19, members are asked to consider an invitation from Tourism Northern Ireland to the chairperson to attend the 153rd Open on Friday the 18th of July 2025. Is the committee content to respond? For me to accept an invitation? Okay. Item 20, members are asked to note correspondence in respect of post-school send. Content for noting members? Yep. Okay, thank you. Item 21 is members are asked to note correspondence again for members' content. Thank you. Item 22 is at page 3 of the table pack, and members have previously noted this response from the Students' Loan Company with item 7. Members content with that? Okay. Yep.
Agreed, members. So what the Student Loan Company have come back. So we wrote to the Department about medical students and the different rates of support that they get. So there's a difference of about between 700 and 1,500 quid per year, depending on whether you're from Scotland, England, or Wales coming here, and comparing with Northern Ireland. So Student Loan Company are also writing to us saying that it's not them, they just administer it. The packages are determined by the different governments, so they've come back in those terms.
So who determines it?
It's the department.
The Department for the
Economy.
Economy.
Yeah. Okay. So we need So what do we bring them in then about this, or what?
We've written to them, and that's at item 7, where they've set out what it is, what the different packages are. So it's for them, and also in terms of Department of Education in England, they will determine what those different levels are. But what the department's doing is they're undertaking a review of higher education funding, and they've indicated this may well be in the mix for that, though we haven't had the terms of reference for that yet.
Okay. Item 24, 25, 20, sorry.
23.
Yeah, sorry, 23, yeah, 23, 24, 25, 26 and 27, all for noting members' content.
Also, Chairperson, there's an item 28, which is in tabled items. This one is, we've written to the department and asked them about the research they did on childcare, providers. They haven't provided us with the research. I think the Minister is still considering it, so if the committee are content to note, Chairperson.
Content.
Lovely.
Okay, item 11, Peter.
So, forward work programme, not much to say. We're back again after summer recess on the 10th. All that we're going to do is we'll look at our correspondence, because there'll be buckets of it, and we'll have a look at our strategic programme, because we might have a bit more clarity on the legislation. And we're also going on a little trip to Sony, which are just over there. So they will take us on a wee tour, tell us about the grid. It's something we tried to do last year. So if members are content with that, then move on to the other bit, Chairperson, which is just if you look at pages 656. So as you're aware, the Insolvency Amendment Bill second stage was passed yesterday. So what I'm going to do, if the committee's agreement, is write out that letter at page 656 to a bunch of stakeholders. And the stakeholders in question are listed at page 660. I got those stakeholders from the department's consultation. I also got raised to scare up a few organisations for me. So it's advice providers, chartered bodies, and some representative bodies on people like insolvency providers and such like, as well as quite a lot of solicitors and credit brokers. So we'll write to all of them if members are content. And so Chairperson can answer, members are content with that, the list of stakeholders. If members think of others, I don't have any problem if members don't mind.
Members content.
Okay, very good. And then finally, Chairperson, we're doing the committee stage, the call for evidence over summer recess. It's not good. I don't like doing that. In case we do get some answers, we'll need a wee bit of time to review them. So that being the case, as the Chair indicated in plenary yesterday, I think it would be advisable to extend the committee stage. I would suggest you extend it to Christmas, and I will endeavour to get it finished way earlier than that. But this will allow us, just in case we need extra time, so if the committee content to do that, it would be 12th of December would be the date to extend the committee stage to.
Members content? Okay, so I put to the committee then that in accordance with Standing Order 34 brackets 4, the period referred to in Standing Order 33 bracket 2 be extended to the 12th of December 2025 in relation to the committee stage of the Insolvency Amendment Bill. Is that agreed, members? Okay. Item 12 then, members, is any other business? No, can I thank your members for your dedication and all your hard work from this session, and hopefully we don't see each other until we return in September. But can I thank committee members and in particular our entire committee team for all their hard work and dedication. And the committee will now adjourn. Thank you.
Committee Room 30. Sound. 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 Committee Room 30, 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 Sound.